Kelley Kitley is a Chicago-based licensed social worker and has been inspiring clients for almost 20 years. Kelley is a sought-after international women's mental health expert and author of Myself, an autobiography of survival, who has appeared in hundreds of publications, podcasts, live news, and radio, including WGN, NBC, the Chicago Tribune, Huffington Post, Self, Shape, and a columnist for the fitness magazine Recovery Connection and Thrive Global. Kelley has shared her experience, strength, and hope on the national media outlets such as Dr. Oz, Today, Dr. Drew, Access Live, and as a TEDx speaker. Kelley is a wife and mother to 4 children. And to me, most of all, Kelley is one of my friends, mentors, and has been a game changer in my own life. Everyone, please help me in welcoming the wonderful Miss Kelley Kitley.
My story begins above my parents' bar in Chicago. It was a bar that my grandfather owned and my dad ultimately bought. We lived above. My parents were managing it. I'm the oldest of 5 and just loved growing up in the city. And I loved the regulars that hung out at the bar. They were like extended family members for us. I didn't know any difference from a drinking versus a non-drinking culture. I started drinking at a really young age. At the age of 12, I had my first drink, which ultimately ended up in a blackout. And it was just my norm. I remember drinking out of a Solo cup at a party with older boys, and the music was blaring and the alcohol flowed, and I immediately felt a shift in the way that I was feeling. I was calmer, I was more confident, and ultimately ended up drinking too much and passing out. Alcohol really gave me permission to not feel so responsible and to be perfectionistic and overachieving. I refer to it as like the Kelley drinking or the not Kelley drinking, or the good Kelley and the bad Kelley. Once I made the decision to have a drink, I was off to the races and I didn't have a care in the world. So when I was in graduate school, I did an internship at an intensive outpatient program for people who were getting treatment for substance abuse. And it was another opportunity for me to say, I'm not as bad as. I didn't lose my job. My family is still intact. I have a healthy relationship with my boyfriend. There were all these qualifiers that I remember thinking and going through a checklist. And it was hard. I mean, I was in college. I was 21, 22 years old when I would go to this internship. And there were days that I would go to the internship hungover, and I felt like a hypocrite. At that point, I didn't think I had a problem. Again, it was normalized because I was binge drinking in college and everybody was drinking like that as well. But I think what I was really looking for, or I know what I was looking for, was to learn as much about addiction as I could so that I could dodge the bullet. You know, I had been in therapy and had recovered or had been in recovery from childhood sexual abuse and an eating disorder. And I felt like I was in college and I was on my way and I felt really healthy. And I was walking home from a bar that I was working at in Chicago on my way to my boyfriend's house, who is now my husband. It was 8 o'clock at night and I turned onto a side street from a main street in Chicago, and a man was walking down the street next to me. And I remember I had this intuition, something didn't feel right. I'd just taken a self-defense class in college. And so I remember them saying, look your attacker in the eye, make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. And I walked past this person, I thought exuding confidence, and as soon as he got up to me, he clothespinned me to the ground, got on top of me, and started sexually assaulting me. And I was able to break free and run for my life, but it was a total random act, and I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. It did take a long time to feel safe. I struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder and really just a hypersensitivity to my surroundings. When I was taken off guard like that and then feeling like I was fighting for my life, just feeling safe in my own skin on a daily basis was a real challenge. And that was really a transformative experience for me, which is why I wanted to become a therapist myself. Fast forward 6 years and I was living my dream. I had a beautiful family and a career that I loved, and I still felt anxious every day. We knew that we wanted a big family, but the timing of it just happened so quickly for us. And so living that far from family with not a whole lot of support, and then having postpartum anxiety and panic, it was really a way for me to soothe myself. It gave me something to look forward to when I would come home from work to take the edge off, and found myself just habitually drinking. Not over drinking at that point, but it was a habit, and it was something that I really looked to the clock to say, okay, now it's time. I can have my glass of wine to unwind for the day, like I had earned it. I remembered I felt very scattered and I was forgetful, and so feeling like I just couldn't hold it all together was a sure sign for me that something was off. I tried moderation management for years. I tried to put a limit on how many glasses of wine I would have a week. I would alternate between red wine, white wine. I started drinking tequila on the rocks because I heard that that would give you more energy, and I was able to get my laundry done and pack the kids' lunches for school the next day. I tried everything, and there were certainly times where I was successful, where I could just have 2 glasses of wine and be done for the night. But the issue with it was so unpredictable. I wasn't sure how much I would drink or how it would affect me. When I ultimately decided to stop drinking, I was at a CrossFit class nonetheless, that was really intense, and we were doing burpees, and it was a nice spring day, and my friend Bridget and I walked outside from the class, and she asked me how my drinking was. And I just burst into tears and said that I had really been struggling. And she said, would you like to come to a women's meeting with me sometime? And I said, no, I can't. I have all these bottles of wine at my house, and some are open, and I have to drink them all first before I decide to stop drinking. And she said, or you could throw them, or you could pour it down the kitchen sink. And I kind of sat on it, and I said, I'll go to the meeting with you. I don't know if I'll stop drinking by Wednesday. This was on a Sunday. And I came home, and sure enough, on that drive home from it was like an out-of-body experience. I just walked in the door and started pouring it all in the sink, and hadn't had a drink until that meeting on Wednesday, which I still didn't know if I was gonna not drink, but I wanted to see what this secret society they call Alcoholics Anonymous was, and I went with her. And it was the most welcoming and supportive community of women, and I felt right at home. And something changed in me that night that just kept me saying I didn't want to drink anymore. I could relate to this group so much, and it was moms, and it was all women, and it was women who had stories similar to mine. My drinking was something I kept secret. People observed how, I don't want to say out of control, but how much more boisterous I became. And people called me the life of the party, and thought I was really funny when I drank. And when I saw my friend stop drinking after she had had a really bad experience, it was somebody who drank similarly to me, and also was an example of what living a life without alcohol was like. And she just felt so at peace to me, and it was the most calm I had ever seen her. And I desperately wanted to know how she was doing it. And she led the way and really took my hand, and we explored that journey together. Women are drinking more and at faster rates, and it's catching up to them a lot quicker because we are managing so many things. We are managing households and careers, and being the primary caretaker and maybe the primary financial provider, that a lot of times it just feels too much. And so we turn to alcohol as a real quick fix to be able to self-soothe. It's very fast acting, but it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. We live in such a drinking saturated culture that it is really normalized, and a lot of times this gray area drinking may just become something that is habitual and people aren't thinking about it as much. And so it's part of their nighttime routine when they get home or they're cooking dinner. Alcohol is a depressant, and anytime that there is a shift in any kind of behaviors, or you're obsessively thinking about it, or you're having regrets the next morning, or it's affecting your relationship, I think that it's really important for people to look at their drinking patterns. And I ask my clients to look at all of their behaviors in terms of exercise and nutrition and sleep patterns. Alcohol is on that list as well, because it should not be treated any differently than anything else that we engage in. And what I think is really important to recognize is it's not, am I an alcoholic or am I not? It's, how is alcohol working in my life? And is it helping or is it hindering? And that can oftentimes be the answer right there for a lot of women. Shame and secrets are absolutely what keep people hiding and not wanting to share their experience, because it can be so painful. But I can guarantee once somebody shares any secret with somebody else, I've experienced it myself, and I've worked with women who say what a sense of relief they feel. The decision about writing my book was something that I knew I always wanted to do. And I had started writing the book long before I had stopped drinking. And for some reason, I just couldn't get the book finished. It took me years and years. And that was part of the reason why, because I recognized that that was a piece of my story that still needed to be told. But because I hid so much of what I was going through, and because it was so secretive, I found myself reading other women's stories to try to connect and to find a way to do things differently. And because it helped me, I knew that my story could also help other women. I think something that I would educate people about is not to compare yourself to other people, and to really listen to that intuition, because intuitively we know the answer, and a lot of times we try to talk ourselves out of what the correct answer that we know lives inside of us, because we're listening to so many other people. My 6.5 years of sobriety has been the most consistent thing I've ever done in my life. And in my toolbox, being able to practice being more kind and gentle with myself and constantly checking in. And I do that by writing down a list of things that I need to make sure that I hit on a daily basis, reaching out to somebody, or spending time reflecting or connecting with my husband. I was somebody who would run from the minute I woke up to the minute my head hit the pillow. And a lot of that was just pure exhaustion and self-medicating with alcohol just to manage life. And today I'm still pretty fast-paced, but I take time to slow down, and things don't bother me as much as they once did. And that in and of itself is a huge relief. I have more fun sober than I ever did drinking. I don't want to paint a false picture that initially you stop drinking and it's so amazing and you feel great. It's really hard and it's an adjustment, but I knew it was the right thing. And I have so much fun dancing. I love to dance. And I have such a good time interacting with people, where before I had a lot of social anxiety, and which was part of the reason why I drank. But now I make it a point to go up and talk to people and have authentic conversations and not feel like I'm hiding or avoiding people. The 3 best things about my life today without alcohol is that when I wake up every morning, I know that I'm doing the best job that I can, and not carrying around the shame and the guilt of beating myself up, and that I get to be a present mom and a present wife. And I still have a lot of faults, but I know that I am conscious in my mind and body in the way that I show up, and that has made all the difference. Hi. Oh, you guys, what a day this has been. I text Jesse like 14 minutes into this morning and I was like, I'm already crying. And, what a gift. And I'll probably cry throughout because that's just what I do. And they're tears of joy today, which is such a shift. And, I'm so happy I wanted to be with you guys in person and hug you. And, this is really a better alternative, or not a better, I'm sorry. It is a great alternative that I didn't expect to feel the way that I feel in this moment. So thank you all for being here and thank you for rallying for recovery. What an awesome way to spend a Saturday. And, I'm so grateful to Hanner because what he was saying about all these different modalities of being in recovery is so important because for me, if I look at my family of origin, there is addiction everywhere. And addiction is addiction is addiction, whether it's sex addiction, drug addiction, alcohol, you name it, gambling. It's all brain stuff and behaviors and the obsession of mind. And for me, looking at my own family of origin and knowing at a really young age that I was probably playing Russian roulette and not knowing how things would turn out. And as you heard in my story, I was very conscious of it at a young age. Growing up at a bar, that's usually where I start my story and people are like, okay, I can fill in the blanks from there. And being able to really live in a culture that was so saturated in alcohol and that being so normalized that I didn't notice any difference. And when I was growing up, anybody who had a drinking problem was kind of whispered about, or it was something that wasn't out in the open, and it was like a dirty word, the person who overdrank, and nobody talked about it the next day and we swept it under the rug. And when I first started on my road to recovery and started going to meetings, I found 12-step support to be so helpful for me. But as a mom and somebody who was working, I also felt like, oh my gosh, am I not doing this right? I found a sponsor and was supposed to go to so many meetings a week and talk to my sponsor every day and get on my knees. And I was doing all of those things because I craved, first and foremost, abstinence from alcohol. And I knew that these were suggestions, and I kept going along and following that path of what people suggested. But what I recognized, kind of like the difference in religion and spirituality for me, having grown up Catholic, I thought, oh, I'm spiritual. I have a connection with God. It was kind of like going through the motions, and I was looking for something so much more. And I was looking for an in-depth connection with something bigger than myself. And so for me today, that video was made last summer, being 7.5 years sober today, my recovery has grown and evolved and shifted since I first got sober. And so I think it's important not to compare ourselves to what other people's journey is. And when we talk about substance abuse, I like to tell people I'm not only professionally trained, but I have a lot of personal experience too. So it's a nice balance of being able to tap into my own experience as well as have some solid foundation there. But what was really apparent was that I couldn't outsmart it. I couldn't dodge the bullet of substance abuse. And that felt like a failure for me. Today I can say I'm super grateful. But it is a spectrum. And I always thought there were non-drinkers and people who couldn't function. And there's all this middle area, all this gray area. And I found like I could abstain or I would be off to the races. And so there was nothing that was consistent that made me feel like I really have a problem with this. And I come from two alcoholic parents. One is in long-term sobriety. And when I asked her how she did it, when I was inquiring about stopping drinking, she said, well, God is my higher power and I just stopped drinking. So she hasn't worked a program from what I can see, or doesn't identify as being in recovery. But for so many years, I was like, well, I'll just stop and God will be my higher power. And it didn't work for me after many failed attempts. And so I was like, okay, well, that's not the way. And I didn't look like the way my dad drank. And I didn't look like the way my brother drank. And so I always thought like, well, I'm not that bad yet. But I do get really teary-eyed when I talk about my kids. On accident, I've become this kind of face of mom drinking culture, and I didn't seek that out. I did write a book about my story, and against every recommendation of colleagues and family members who said, professionals don't do that. You can't share your story, you'll lose all your clients, just a lot of negativity. And for me, hearing other people's story is what helped me get better, and knowing that I knew where to go with it when it was with my best friend and other women who were similar in age as I was, and that I felt really connected to. I put those voices out of my head of what people suggested and listen to that intuition. And being able to share my story has opened up a whole nother category of my work in mental health to this really cool niche of women who want to achieve sobriety. And I recognized at one point in my journey as a mom, I say that my 4 kids really prolonged my decline in my alcoholism, because I was pregnant 4 times and I abstained. And the more kids I had, the harder it got and the worse my drinking became. And I promised myself that I didn't want to become like my parents. And there was one morning that I looked in the mirror and said, I am repeating this cycle. And so the importance of breaking the cycle of addiction, and when Hannah talked about this trauma-informed treatment approach as well, so much of substance abuse is a symptom of trauma. And we need to first get abstinent and peel back the layers and look at what's underneath those things. And as Jesse mentioned in the beginning, when we started this morning, we are in a mental health crisis. The suicide rate and the relapse rate is up 30%. I've lost colleagues, children to the disease of addiction over the pandemic. And I use this information because not to alarm people, but to bring awareness to the fact that depression really thrives in loneliness and isolation. And we can see even today that we're physically distant, but I feel so emotionally connected. And the more we can do that, and the more we can check in on people, and the more that we can, take somebody for a walk or drop off groceries, or, do random acts of kindness, not only for us in recovery, but for other people who might be struggling, can make all the difference. And especially as we're going into this new season, I'm located in Chicago. Most of us are in Wisconsin. The weather's changing, and that could mean that people are going to isolate even more. And so it's to bring awareness to it and to continue the conversation and saying to people, how are you really doing? The scariest thing for me, and also something that keeps me on my toes, is when I hear about people in long-term recovery relapsing. And just to tie the media in, because I think it can be extremely beneficial and influential. I don't know if anybody listens to the Armchair Expert. Dak Shepard is the host. He's an actor, and he relapsed after 16 years of sobriety during the pandemic. And so on his podcast, he just tells the raw, honest truth. And that's so much of what real recovery is. And being able to own his story and explain what happened in his relapse, and how he got further and further from practicing a daily reprieve and a daily act of doing the next right thing. And so being able to say that and then go back to being able to try again, and removing that shame is what helps keep us moving forward. And in my work as well, I have been extremely busy, especially these last few weeks, and I've made a commitment to getting out from behind the screen and meeting clients of mine in parks or going for a walk, to remind ourselves of that connection. And I think that's why today is so important, because, I mean, looking at all those faces on the quilt and thinking about where we are in this moment, whether you've lost a loved one, whether you're a person in recovery, whether you are actively trying to find your own program, we can't do this alone, and we have to do it together. And that was so much of my shame in my drinking patterns, was I didn't want anybody to know because I was so embarrassed. And that release that happens when we do share our story and people say, me too. And so when I have been able to pay it forward, I have noticed many women in my community are getting sober, people who are parents in my kids' school, because there are safe places for people to talk about being a woman, especially in recovery, which I am not discriminating against. I mean, as we've learned today and continue to talk about how nobody is immune to experiencing addiction, that being able to have that ripple effect of having somebody that you trust and can really get honest with and remove that shame is such a part of the healing process. And so today, what recovery looks like for me and for a lot of my clients is being able to find a supportive community, being able to set boundaries with different family members. If any of you are like me, you know, who come from a long line of addicts, there has been a shift that's had to happen within our own family dynamics. Some of us are in recovery, some people are actively using, and what I remind myself is we get to show up just as we are, as a living example of what that looks like, and we never know how somebody else is impacted just by being in our presence. And I had seen that in my own family. The reality is, you know, I have 4 kids ranging in age of 14 to 8. And that's where I get choked up again. I think about, you know, being 12 when I had my first drink, and knock on wood, I'm not aware that anybody's using at this point in their life, but I do have concerns about that. And I know the people who've been vulnerable today and sharing their experiences. But when we bring light to it and we discuss and psychoeducate, I think that we bring a whole new awareness. For me, you know, growing up in the early 80s, we didn't talk about this. And so, I remember at one point my mom said to me, you know, you should really be careful because we have a lot of alcoholics in our family. And so that was something that was a tape that always played in my head. So every time I drank, I felt like I was doing something wrong, even before it became problematic. So at a young, you know, my kids know that I no longer drink, and they celebrate my sober anniversary with me every year on March 10th. And, you know, their dad drinks, and he's a normie, as we like to call him. I didn't even know those existed, but we met at my parents' bar, no surprise. So the impact on the family is huge. And that's really what I work with in my advocacy work as well, and how the kids are affected and how partners are affected, and the shift that has to change within a relationship too, when you have one person in sobriety and either somebody who is actively using or doesn't have a problem, how we engage in that psychoeducation and how we support them through Al-Anon and family sessions. And that has been something that we continue to practice daily and have conversations about, that are really open and allowing our kids to ask questions about that. And the best thing about it is when we are at family parties, the kids always come up to me and ask if they can have a sip of whatever I'm drinking, because they know that it's not an adult drink. So that makes me feel really proud. And my goal at this point, the book is being adapted into a short film called Gray Area. We were set to shoot the short film for educational purposes right when COVID hit, and did fundraising and got people on board who were really supportive, because my passion is breaking the silence, breaking the stigma, especially within this mom culture of drinking that is really normalized. We see memes all over the place of, wine o'clock, or being able to have wine in mom's sippy cup, and, people even over quarantine talking about quartinis or whatever, that just normalizes and makes people feel like, well, everybody's drinking more during COVID, or everybody drinks the way that I do. And if we continue to repeat that tape in our head, we're going to remain stuck. And for me, it was hitting that spiritual bankruptcy. And I remember the internal destruction that I felt in the height of my drinking, of really not liking who I was, not being the mom that I wanted to be to my kids, not being the partner or the sister or the daughter, and constantly feeling on edge, and really just self-medicating. And for me, being able to remove that has been such a blessing, and something that I am reminded of daily when I do this work. And so I know that historically, there was a time when we didn't talk about I want to be careful with my words, because I know that was one of the things that we really focused on, and I get tripped up sometimes, but just being able to recognize that there was a lot of shame and people didn't talk about it. And I even remember one time when I had contributed to an article about being a member of AA, somebody had kind of slapped me on the hand and said, go back to the principles. We're not supposed to promote. And so I know things have changed, and I try to be sensitive to that. But at the same time, I do believe that the more light we can shed on it, the more people can feel that they can ask for help. And even since my book came out, and since my specialty has been treating women who are trying to achieve sobriety, I have recognized that people are grateful for being able to say, thank you for sharing your story. And so many people told me not to share my story, and I'm glad I took that risk. So it is one day at a time, especially now.
and especially with all the stressors that we're all experiencing. And the more we can focus on gratitude and the things around us that keep us grounded, the harder we have to hit those, and the more meditation I'm doing on a daily basis and exercising and getting out and walking. I mean, basic living skills were something I neglected for so long. So sometimes it's just a really simple approach to bring it back to what's at the foundation, and it can really make a difference. I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to finishing out the afternoon with you.